Morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here this morning. My name is Posh. I'm Senior Vice President of Administration at Northwestern Medicine. And very thankful to Dr. Brooke for inviting me this morning to kick us off and just say a few words. When you put together events like this, I know Mike's been working on this for a very long time. These things don't happen by luck. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. Today's event is co-hosted by the Northwestern Medicine's Isaac Ray Research Program in Behavioral Sciences. The mission of the Isaac Ray Research Program is to champion interdisciplinary research at the intersection of human behavior and legal systems in order to develop evidence-based interventions to improve public policy and advance social justice. Our other co-sponsor this morning is the Illinois Academy of Criminology, a criminal justice policy organization founded in 1950. The Illinois Academy of Criminology includes academics, legal specialists, law enforcement, correctional professionals, authors, and others sharing a common interest in criminal justice. And also a quick thank you to Robert Clifford and the Clifford Law Offices for their sponsorship of today's event. So when Dr. Brooke asked me to speak, I had a chance to think about it because you asked me quite a long time ago, and there's been so many events that have unfolded in this country and around the world in this space. Just look to last week in Las Vegas of kind of what happened in an academic setting. And I was at an event with some of my friends last weekend, and one of my friends is a 30-year veteran of Chicago Police Force. He just retired. And my other best friend runs one of the largest school districts, a superintendent in the Western suburbs. So I told him that I was going to be here this morning, and just we had a chance to talk. My friend Gary, the policeman, said, you know, he had done SWAT detail and done a lot of different things in CPD, and he referenced the playbook. He said, you know, we have a playbook of how we respond to these things from, you know, the minute the call comes in, what they do, how they organize, and what they do when they get on the scene. And as we remember from what happened in Uvalde, you know, it doesn't always go according to plan. My friend Craig, who's a superintendent of a large school district, said, you know, we're teaching kids run, hide, fight. We're teaching kids who are, you know, really small about active shooter drills. But we also have a playbook. And again, recognizing it doesn't go well. So when I started to think about when I started to think about academic health systems and kind of what we can do in that playbook format, we can do what we do in our trauma center, which is to respond. So when people come to us, you know, we can clean up and patch up the clinical, physical wounds. But we're starting to think about what we can do after that happens. So a lot of work has happened linking our trauma centers in the city of Chicago together. Advocate, University of Chicago, the Level 1 Trauma Center, Sinai, to think about how we can better serve those individuals who come to us after they've been injured. So connecting them to social determinants of health screenings, to understand what mental health resources we can connect them to immediately. And even things like employment. You know, how can we start to think about social determinants of health in this conversation? Northwestern Medicine is one of the few academic health systems nationally that is on a pathway to screen every single one of our patients on social determinants of health. And, you know, we've screened thousands of patients already, and although we can't respond to every one of their needs, it's really important for us to know what our patients are dealing with so we have some sense of housing insecurity, job insecurity, food insecurity, transportation, and there are things that we can connect these folks to. The other, as I was reading some of the bios of the amazing folks that you'll hear from today, I also, this theme of evidence-based kept popping up. You know, what can we do in an evidence-based way to replicate work that leads to these playbooks? One of the things that, you know, I'm most proud of in the hospital community is Senator Durbin, Illinois senior senator, in 2018 asked 10 hospital CEOs, all the academics and some of the safety nets, to meet him in a hotel for a discussion. And he challenged all of us in that room. What can you as hospitals do around gun violence and violence prevention? And so we had a chance to think about it, engaged people like, you know, my dear friend, the late great Dr. Shernansky, was part of those discussions on what we could do as hospitals to really build scaffolding in communities to prevent gun violence. So we started to look at things like social determinants of health, employment, school programming, youth pipeline programs to get kids engaged in something that they could be productive and find a career in. We looked at things like mental health resources led by non-clinical professionals where people felt safe going into spaces like that. So we are 5 years into the HEAL initiative. Senator Durbin just held a hearing in DC last week. I'll make sure this is available to everybody. But what you'll see in the HEAL report is an evidence-based framework of what hospitals can do and 5 years worth of results of how we've increased hiring by 81% in under-resourced communities and hospitals. We know that economics and jobs really kind of prevent and can prevent violence. We also, you'll see in the report where we've increased our supply chain spend in these same under-resourced communities. And it also forced us to, as hospitals, not compete, but collaborate. One example I'll give quickly is an initiative we started with University of Chicago Medicine, and Dr. Brooks been involved with this, Bright Start Community Outreach. It's a faith-led coalition of Southside pastors who wanted to be trained as first responders when someone experienced a trauma around gun violence. We imported a model from Israel called Natal. We had the Israelis come and train these faith leaders for almost 4 months. And this started 10 years ago. And again, Dr. Chinansky was with us when we started this initial work. And what we've built in that 10 years is a resiliency model on the South Side that has touched over 40,000 lives on what to do when someone encounters a vicarious trauma or direct trauma. They're connected to a faith leader who's been trained, and they trust faith leaders more than they trust any of us in this room to at least start that behavioral health journey. But we also focused on jobs. So we set an ambitious goal of 5,000 new jobs in Bronzeville by 2025. We are there and surpassing that. And the CDC funded this initiative to look at how this could be replicated across the country. So this notion of trauma and training in Bronzeville has really worked. It's one of the only neighborhoods in Chicago where violent crime has decreased in that 10-year period because of trauma counseling and jobs. So these are the kind of evidence-based frameworks and strategies we hope to replicate. We've shared this model with Fort Lauderdale and Memphis already. And how can we kind of share this and push it out across the country? I thought Senator Durbin said something very interesting in his hearing last week. And this, I hope, would resonate with all of you. Collecting data, identifying trends, developing strategies to prevent harm, reducing risk, and sharing these practices is how we combat an epidemic like this. It's worked in the past. We use the same public health approach to dramatically cut automobile fatalities. We still drive where we need to go, but we have seat belts and speed limits to get us there alive. Public health experts are already working to address gun violence in a very similar way. And so I think, again, if you look for hope in this space, I think it's in these evidence-based models that hopefully we'll hear a little bit about today and how we can share these models and replicate these models. So I want to just a little bit of housekeeping. I wanted to just kind of go through the agenda for today and just share a little bit about our speakers, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Alathari. So we're going to hear our keynote address this morning from Dr. Alathari. She is Chief of the U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center, NTAC, where she oversees the center's targeted violence behavioral research program. The finding from these projects identified behaviors, motives, and triggers of individuals who engage in various forms of targeted violence to include schools, workplace, terrorism, attacks against government officials and facilities, and mass attacks in public spaces. After that, Dr. Hanlon is going to join us. Professor of Psychiatry and Neurology, co-director of the Forensic Psychology Research Lab at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine, the board-certified clinical neuropsychologist who specializes in forensic neuropsychology. And then Dr. Brook is going to be here to talk. He is board-certified clinical neuropsychologist, associate professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Northwestern's Feinberg School of Medicine. He is the current director of the Isaac Ray Research Program in Behavioral Sciences and Law. All around good guy too, we just have to add that. Michelle Hoy-Watkins, be here as part of our panel, licensed clinical psychologist with more than 20 years of experience in providing clinical, forensic, and police public safety psychological services. Dr. Kavanaugh, adjunct professor of psychiatry at Northwestern's Feinberg School of Medicine, professor of psychiatry at Rush Medical College, former chairman of the board of the Ray Center. And finally, I'm really happy that Justice Joy Cunningham is here, of the Illinois Supreme Court. Joy and I worked together, gosh, 20 years ago.
Seems like
Seems
100
100
years.
years ago. But we are really glad that Joy is here this morning. Justice, Illinois Supreme Court, attended City University of New York, where she obtained a bachelor's of science degree. She later attended John Marshall Law School in Chicago, where she earned her law degree. Before joining the Illinois Appellate Court, she served as Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary for the Northwestern Memorial System. So Joy, thank you so much for batting cleanup today and just being here. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our keynote speaker, Dr. Alathari, to kick us off. Thank you.
I wanted to thank a few people, particularly I want to thank Dr. Alathari for coming in for this. It was an illuminating and fascinating talk. Also, particularly like to thank Dr. Brooke and Dr. Kavanaugh for the work that they did in developing and organizing this this event. Those people often go thankless, but they did a lot of work and really pulled this together. So I'm very appreciative of the work they did. So as I mentioned, I'll be talking about psychological and criminological characteristics of mass murderers. And just to begin with, just a few definitions so that we are all on the same page. Mass murders, as you probably know, in at least this is the definition from the FBI, involves 4 or more victims within a 24-hour period in one location. That is these are very different crimes than the other 2 that are listed here. But once in a while, you see these terms used interchangeably in the press or in other entertainment presentations. Serial murders are extremely different than mass murders, both in terms of character, in terms of personality, and in terms of motive. You're very different crimes, 3 or more victims and 3 or more separate events at 3 or more locations with a cooling off period between. It's one of the classic serial killers would be people like John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, the BTK killer, and also then spree murders are much less common mass murders, but they certainly unfortunately do occur. They're actually more similar to mass murders, far more similar than serial murders are. They tend to be defined as a single event with multiple victims in 2 or more locations in rapid succession with no cooling off period. And examples of those would be someone like Andrew Cunanan in the late 90s, or Nicholas Shields, which is a more local case. Now, again, to continue with some definitions, as I just mentioned, the mass murder definition that comes from the behavioral science unit of the FBI. So the FBI definition of a gun mass murder is 4 or more victims that are killed by gunfire within a 24-hour period at one location. That is a different definition than what is used by the Gun Violence Archive, and it's commonly used in the press, in which 4 or more victims are shot, not and injured, but not necessarily killed. It doesn't make these any less a lesser crime in any way, and they're just as serious and just as destructive and disruptive to the lives of hundreds of people. But they are different, and you'll commonly see the Gun Violence Archive definition reported in the press. And as you can see down below, some of the differences here that just from 2020 to 2023, there are 2,577 mass shootings on the Gun Archive definition, whereas 125 gun mass murders based on the FBI definition. And I also provided these data in 2019 and 2022. You see this massive increase in mass shootings from 417 to 647, whereas the number of mass murders increased notably, but not significantly. Now, I can't do a talk on mass murder without talking about, at least briefly, family mass murders. And I'm not going to spend too much time. I really have one slide on family mass murders, but they should not be overlooked. And I'll show you why in just a moment. So I'm going to talk just very briefly about family mass murders, also commonly referred to as family annihilations or familicides. And they are they're similar in some ways, but they're often quite different than the so-called classic mass murders. Again, these are terms that come from the FBI. Classic mass murders are more similar to the kinds of crimes that Dr. Alathari just covered in great depth. So with regard to family mass murders, this is clearly the most common type of mass murder in this country. And there's really no other mass murders that are even close in terms of numbers. Unfortunately, they constitute nearly half of all mass murders in this country. They are obviously the most extreme type of domestic homicide. And the highest frequency of these crimes occur in the Southern American states, but they are distributed throughout the country. I don't think there is a state where there have not been multiple family mass murders. And they almost all occur in private residences, unlike the classic mass murders that I'll be talking about in greater depth, which Dr. Alathari just covered in detail. 89% of these are committed by males, similar to mass murders in general. 50% by whites. This is predominantly a white male crime. 30% committed by blacks. The situation typically involves some interpersonal conflict. About 75% of these family mass murders involve some interpersonal conflict. The primary target is a female, almost exclusively. Female, typically wife, ex-wife, girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, and about 50% of the victims are children and adolescents. Motives for family mass murder typically is revenge. Can't say exclusively, but with great probably 90% or more, probably upwards of 95% involve revenge. There are triggers as well, and there's often an acute loss that's experienced by the killer, which is generally the father figure of the family, and it's generally a catastrophic loss of job, money, embroiled in a bitter divorce or some romantic rejection. Now, these are numbers from 2006 to 2023 involving all mass murders in the U.S. These are data that come from the Northwestern University criminology database that has historically and continues to be managed by Dr. James Fox and Dr. Jack Levin, criminologists at Northwestern University in Boston. They collaborate with Associated Press and the USA Today in publishing these data. These data are easily available to you if you're interested in looking at their database. It is quite informative and instructive to look through their database. As you can see here, as I just mentioned, with regard to family mass murders, in terms of locations and type, the greatest number occur in private residences, and those constitute nearly all of the family mass murders. They also constitute a number of felony murders, particularly crimes that involve a home invasion and a robbery. Typically, it's a drug-related robbery, maybe guns, drugs, etc. And that's the other a smaller group within the that top number 396 that occurs in residences. Next, it involves mass murders in commercial, retail, entertainment venues, open spaces, multiple locations, vehicles, school, college, etc. Now, continuing with the discussion on classic mass murders, these are diverse crimes in many ways. They're certainly diverse with regard to location, and they are somewhat diverse with regard to motive. Most mass killers target a select group of individuals. These are not random crimes. These are not spontaneous crimes, and they are deliberate and determined individuals who tend to often plan these crimes for days, weeks, years. I'll show you examples in a couple of moments about of individuals who planned their killings for several years, and specifically with regard to where, when, who, weapons, etc. The triggers are the same, or similar anyway, in terms of there's often, not always, but often some catastrophic loss. Typically is job or money. It may be loss of involvement with the family, but there's usually some loss involved. Now, moving on to motives. I'll spend a few minutes talking about motives here. The primary motive, the most common motive with mass murders of any type, so this would include both family mass murders and classic mass murders, the most common motive is revenge. And the revenge is generated from the wish to be able to punish those responsible for the killer's failure to succeed in life, essentially. And that may also involve failure to succeed in school, work, career, romance, life in general, and also an attempt to punish those who the killer believes has caused him suffering. I can tell you that many mass murderers, and certainly the mass murders that we evaluated and that are in our database in the forensic psychology lab, that many are remarkably self-pitying individuals. They externalize blame. They are often failures, losers, and they are looking to punish someone for their self-perceived miserable life. And they do that through these kind of tragic acts. For example, as Dr. Alathari mentioned earlier, and I show you this because this crime has become a source of influence and emulation by many school shooters. This is in the view of many school shooters, this is the quintessential example of their crimes. Columbine High School massacre in 1999, Littleton, Colorado. These two individuals killed 13 people, injured 24. Had they been bullied in school? Yes, they had. Had they been humiliated in their school? Yes, they had. So in their view, this was an act of violent revenge that they enacted. They planned this for years, and they developed a very strategic and unfortunately effective plan for killing at this school. One example of individuals that they influenced would be this person, who was responsible for the Virginia Tech massacre in 2007, who was clearly admired. Eric Harris, one of the two Columbine killers, actually wrote that in his so-called manifesto, which I think is kind of an unfortunate term that I think the press often cites when they find writings by these people. Calling them manifestos give them more credit than is probably due, but this individual clearly influenced by the Columbine killers, as many others have been. This is then on this topic of school shootings. These are the school and university mass murders from 2006 to 2023. Again, available from the Northwestern University mass murder database. The reason I'm showing this is that I wanted to point out, and I think Dr. Alathari also alluded to it, is that the shooters that target K to 12, the elementary schools and high schools, one or the other, they tend to be remarkably young. They tend to be less than 20 years old, maybe into their early 20s, but many are in their teens. For example, just the classic example being the Columbine shooters, both were under 20. They were seniors in high school, so they were 17 and 18 years old. And that's the same case with Sandy Hook. He was 20 years old. This person was, I'll show you in a minute, he was about 20. Margie Douglas was also around, I think 21. Robb Elementary was around 20. So these are young, revenge-seeking killers. Okay, next motive is hate, which is involves the homicidal expression of hatred and elimination of some targets of hatred, and combined with attempt to induce fear in others of the same racial, ethnic, gender, and religious groups. Hate tends to be the motive in most mass murders in houses of worship. It's also the primary motive in all racially motivated mass murders, and it similarly is the motive in the misogynistic killings. Some classic examples then would be the Tree of Life Synagogue massacre in Pittsburgh in 2018. Obviously an anti-Semitic hate crime, and resulted in the death of 11 people plus 6 individuals wounded. Another example then would be the mass murder in El Paso, Texas in 2019. Resulted in the death of 23 people. The 21-year-old killer who drove 650 miles in order to essentially execute 23 Hispanic people at this Walmart in El Paso. And consistent with the previous slide, this would be one of the key examples of a misogynistic hate crime. This is a young male who was intensely resentful about the fact that he didn't get enough attention from women. And he was a 22-year-old virgin. And so he took that resentment and hate toward women and focused it on killing students from University of California, Santa Barbara in Isla Vista, California. I believe it was 2014. He then, unfortunately, due to internet groups that like-minded internet groups that are commonly referred to as incels, involuntarily celibate people, men, young men, he then became an incel hero amongst some of those groups on the internet. And he's still admired by them. Next motive, talk about briefly, is power, control, and terror. Now, obviously, and you may be thinking this, there's clearly an overlap here between the motive of hate and the motive of terror or power control. There clearly is, and those terms are often used when they're described in the media interchangeably. But I'll show you a couple examples here of places that they're clearly terrorist attacks, and the killers themselves referred to their crimes as terrorist attacks. So the intent is to induce terror among targeted group, generally driven by extremist causes, in this country, particularly white supremacy, anti-government views, anti-beliefs, etc. Probably one example that some of us can remember would be the Oklahoma Federal Building bombing in 1995. And then another is the Pulse nightclub massacre in Orlando, Florida in 2016, resulting in the death of 49 people. And that individual, Mateen, announced that it was an ISIS generated killing at the Pulse nightclub. An example, again, it's not an American example, but it's a classic example of a terror motivated mass murder. Would be this individual murdered 77 people in Norway on July 22nd of 2011 in two separate killings. He did a car bombing first, which resulted in the death of 8 people, and then proceeded to Utoya Island, where he proceeded to kill 69 innocent campers in his neo-Nazi oriented pseudo-commando killings. Finally, and these are not extremely common, but they do occur, similar to what I was mentioning earlier about some of the felony murders that result in mass killings, where the intent is financial gain, and combined with the elimination of witnesses of the felony. I've seen several of these, examined several of these killers myself. And they often involve a gang element. They commonly involve a drug deal, or a drug deal gone bad, or stealing drugs or stealing drug money, etc. A local example of this type of crime would be, so you may remember this crime. This is the Brown's Chicken Massacre that occurred in Palatine, Illinois in 1993. I was an expert witness in this case. Somewhat surprisingly, This case actually did not come to law enforcement attention for nearly 10 years. It wasn't until Degorski told his girlfriend, referenced this crime to his girlfriend, that eventually became a focus of law enforcement. Okay, in terms of causes, some of this is speculative, and some of it is known. But in terms of there are three different types of theories: biological theories, sociological theories, and psychological theories. That I'm not saying that's exclusively limited to causes, but those tend to be the superordinate categories that these types of that these fall under. Within the biological theories would be brain disorders, brain damage, brain dysfunction, those types of issues. There is certainly some limited evidence that certain types of brain disorders and brain damage can result in violent homicidal behavior. It's certainly with single homicides, that's not uncommon at all to find that someone has had multiple incidents of head trauma or multiple incidents of mild traumatic brain injury. It's very rare for someone who has moderate to severe brain damage to have the cognitive capacity to formulate and execute a mass murder. It's just not realistic that someone with that kind of brain damage is able to do that. Can that person go and kill a particular individual? Sure, and that happens not uncommonly. What's certainly, I'll show you an example in a moment. What's more common certainly are individuals who manifest a disorder within the schizophrenic spectrum. And there are multiple examples of this in the mass murder literature of individuals, not necessarily with schizophrenia, but with schizoaffective disorder, schizophreniform disorder, schizotypal personality, etc. An example of that would be the Aurora, Colorado theater mass murder in 2012. This was an individual who manifested a schizophrenic spectrum disorder. I was an expert witness in this case. He killed 12 people, injured 70 people in 76 shots from 3 weapons at the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises at this theater, and entered from the front, basically shot these individuals standing below them while they're sitting trying to watch a movie. This is the killer sentenced to multiple life sentences plus 3,000 years, I believe. He was not found insane. Very rare to have mass murderers found insane in our courts. And I think the reason is that they're not legally insane. That's certainly my opinion. He was not legally insane, even though he did have a rather bizarre delusional system. He was not, he certainly was capable of appreciating his criminal conduct at the time of this crime. Back on the other point that I was making about brain damage and brain dysfunction, this is one case where there is some evidence of a brain disorder. This is Charles Whitman, who murdered 14 people from the tower on the University of Texas campus in the summer of 1966. He was found at autopsy to have a small tumor adjacent to an amygdala in his brain. It was a very small mass. The notion that that mass could be instrumentally and primarily responsible for his behavior and the attacks in this crime is a bit of a stretch for me. And clearly, this man has a personality that is on which this mass was superimposed. It was a glioblastoma, so it was a highly malignant tumor type. I don't think that explains his behavior on this state in totality, because he also murdered his parents before he left his house, then went to the tower with an arsenal of weapons and was there for hours killing people. Next, and I wrap this up very quickly, are the sociological theories. I'm a neuropsychologist. I think that there is valuable information from the sociological theories. I don't find the sociological theories as they've been proposed to date to be convincing to me with regard to their role in these types of killings. However, one sociological theory, the social learning theory, I do think has a sadly interesting role in these types of crimes, in that mass murderers influence the mass murderers that follow them, and subsequent mass murderers learn from previous mass murderers, just like I mentioned earlier. And Anders Breivik, the Norwegian killer that I showed you a moment ago, was incredibly inspired by Ted Kaczynski. He admired Ted Kaczynski and cited Ted Kaczynski's writings in his own writings. Eric Harris, one of the Columbine killers, was extremely inspired by Timothy McVeigh from the Oklahoma city bombing. And as I think I mentioned before, since 1999, several shooters have voiced their admiration for the Columbine killers, including, as I said before, Cho from Virginia Tech. Now, in terms of psychological theories, and I'm just going to wrap this up on this point with the psychological theories, particularly focused on psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder. In my opinion, and from our data, I find the presence of psychopathy to be a key factor in many of these types of crimes. I'll show you an example of something else. We also have autistic spectrum disorders on this list, as well as other types of personality disorders. But for example, with regard to autistic spectrum, this horrific crime that occurred in 2012 at the Sandy Hook School in Newton, Connecticut, in which 20 first graders were murdered in their classroom, combined with as well as 6 teachers. They were killed by an individual with an autistic spectrum disorder. And there's really no question about that. Did his autism, was that the primary factor in committing this crime? I'm sure it played a role, but I don't know that it was the primary factor. He had attended the same school and had reportedly had resentment and very negative views about these schools and his experience in the schools in Newton, Connecticut. And finally, it's hard to talk about mass murders in Chicago without referencing this creature, Richard Speck, who was responsible for the savage murder of 8 student nurses in a dormitory on East 100th Street in Chicago, Illinois, in summer of 1966. As you may have noticed, this crime and then the University of Texas power crime, they occurred within about 6 weeks of each other. These two crimes launched a great deal of media attention on mass murders at that time and from that time on. Spec, you could probably think about it from what we know about what we learned about Spec after this crime. Probably the poster boy of psychopathy in many ways. And as you also may know, in terms of with regard to psychopathy, tend to be intraspecies predators. That's a term that comes from Robert Hare, fundamental researchers in psychopathy. They're considered to constitute about 1% of the population. Okay, we have 340 million people in this country, so that's you get a lot of psychopaths out there. In our database here in the Forensic Research Lab at Northwestern, we've looked at the multiple victim homicide cases that we have in our database. And so these are individuals that have undergone extensive psychological assessment, neuropsychological evaluations, et cetera. We have a lot of data on these people. But we looked at different types of multiple victim homicides, mass murders, spree murders, serial murders, and triple homicide killers. They found that a little over 50% either clearly manifested, were psychopaths or manifested significant psychopathic traits. So as a neuropsychologist, a forensic neuropsychologist, in my view, I think psychopathy probably has a greater role in terms of a factor to help explain and understand some of these crimes more than some of the other causes that I just mentioned.